We are grateful to have Dr. Karren Eales with us today. Dr. Eales has spent 20 plus years in mixed animal practice in central Illinois. She developed a passion for mental wellness, pursuing further education and certification in mental health coaching. She began researching positive psychology and is currently working to become a brain health trainer through Amen University. Dr. Eales lives with her very understanding husband George and 4 fabulous kiddos. She loves to spend time camping with her family and hanging out with her alpacas.
We're going to talk a little bit about how, or get into how empathy it really is harming us as veterinarians and as Christians, and take a closer look at why empathy can do serious harm to our well-being, and explore how compassion is truly a better path for us, our clinics, our clients, and our patients. Um, I really love the idea of leaning into compassion this year through CVM. And I think it's got so many applications for us as veterinarians. And that's why I really want us to explore what that difference is between empathy and compassion. So if you do a quick search on Amazon for empathy, you're going to find thousands of books on the why and how to be more empathic or empathetic. You can use those interchangeably, but you will see books for leaders, for teachers, for families, for children, and it's being claimed as that like hidden superpower, that answer to all the problems in the world is empathy, right? But you only find a handful that actually address the dangers and the downside of empathy, if you even have realized that there are dangers or downside, because it's just not something that's talked about. And I think we need to explore it a little further. um, I agree with Paul Bloom in his book Against Empathy. He talks about that arguing against empathy is hugely countercultural because we're told what a good thing it is. And that really you might as well be saying you hate kittens if you say you're against empathy. But I promise I don't hate kittens. This is my sweet kitty, Judge Whiskers. So hear me out, and we will get into why God's gift of compassion is a much more worthy pursuit than empathy. So we'll dive into what empathy is and isn't, and we can start with the always engaging dictionary definitions. But empathy really is the action of understanding, of being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of others. And I think one of the really important things to zone zoom in on in that definition is that vicariously experiencing the experiences of others. Whereas compassion is the sympathetic consciousness, really, of others' distress, along with the desire to alleviate that distress. Empathy is actively sharing in the emotions and the emotional experience, whereas compassion acknowledges that emotional experience, but it does not require that you feel that emotion. But at the same time, it stimulates a desire to alleviate the distress. Empathy means that you are really feeling the feelings of other people. If you are in pain, then I feel that pain. If if you are anxious, I pick up that anxiety. So that really is different from compassion, where compassion says, I value your concerns. I understand, or at least I try to understand your feelings, and I care about you, but I do not pick up and absorb those feelings. I was going to show you this quick video from Brene Brown on empathy, but because my bandwidth seems to be so short today, I'm going to hold off. But I would recommend, if you have a moment, just do a quick search on YouTube and take a look at this video. It talks about what we see as empathy right now, but truly what she describes in this video is truly compassion. And there's one thing that I like to point out in this and in other areas where we talk about empathy, and that is where you talk about somebody's truth, that we need to lean into their truth. And that gets really sticky when you're talking about empathy. And that where it gets sticky is when their truth does not necessarily line up with the truth. And then we're leaning into and being empathetic towards something that maybe is not true, or loving. And those are two big components of compassion, is that we are compassionate in truth and love. And we'll get into that a little bit further. But I'm going to try to skip back that. So that was just my question there. It was, is that empathy? And what she was describing, I believe, was compassion. So we are clearly called to be compassionate. We see this many times over and over throughout the Bible, that we are called, we must be compassionate just as our Father is compassionate, like it says here in Luke 36. So we know that compassion is a calling for us in all areas of our lives, including in our positions as veterinarians or veterinary professionals. And so if we're called to compassion, what does that look like? So, and I'd like to compare a little further those ideas of empathy and compassion. So compassion is biblical. It traces back to the Latin of cum, which means with, and passio, which is to bear or to suffer with. So God's compassion towards his people and his call for us is ubiquitous throughout the Bible. And we see this over and over, that God is compassionate towards us and we are to be compassionate towards others. And we see that many times where we actually see the word compassionate, but a lot more where it's conveyed without the specific word of compassion, such as in Matthew 11:30, where Jesus offers compassion to those weighted down and weary with the words, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Or in Zechariah 7:9, where he says, "Render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another." Noticing that we are asked to show kindness and mercy and truth in Zechariah 7:9. I think, taking the time to realize that render true judgments means that our kindness to one another still needs to be based from a place of truth. And that gets a little sticky, like I said, versus empathy, where empathy didn't really come into play until 1908, 1910, that range. And so it's an early 20th century term that comes from the German, and it means feeling into or feeling in. This word, the empathy, was used primarily to describe how one felt when moved by art or music. So it's completely based in the realm of feeling. And it kind of changed and morphed into what we know it as now, at the end of World War II. And that's when it started to be seen more as an interpersonal skill, and where it kind of took its place in the psychology world. And they began to look at that as an interaction between individuals, or that interpersonal skill. So one thing that I feel is important is to look at empathy and the original use of empathy, in knowing that it indicates feeling, that it's really a feeling based idea, and that we need to give empathy based feelings the same consideration we would any type of feelings. Is it good or is it bad? So we are led to believe that empathy is always good. We're told over and over, what the world needs is more empathy, that we as in general need to be more empathetic towards the people around us. But there's a danger in that, because empathy is not necessarily good or bad. We need to give it the same scrutiny as we would other feelings. So we know that feelings of love, anger, I mean, love is pretty much always good, but anything else, anger, admiration, even loyalty, and definitely fear, those all have a good and a bad side to those coins. And empathy is no different. It is neutral in nature. It is not always good. And so I think that's another a thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through this, that idea that empathy is always going to lead to a good action, is not true. And we need to look at that with a more critical eye. And empathy being based in feelings, like most of our feelings, are more easily hijacked. So feelings that are coming out of that empathetic reaction are more easily hijacked and more easily manipulated than when we're coming from a cognitive decision for action. So hopefully that makes it clear that empathy and compassion really are not synonymous. And so that is something that we're being led to believe right now. And some of that is that melding of empathy, love, and compassion together. Because empathy has been really erroneously conflated with being caring and loving. And in her book, Toxic Empathy, Allie Beth Stuckey discusses this melding of empathy, love, and compassion and calls it a pitfall for Christians, especially in this day and age, that we want to be loving and caring, and we clump all of those things together. And so one of the things that it's almost a direct attack to a Christian to be unempathetic. So another thing that she brings up in her book Toxic Empathy is that we are called to love our neighbors, and loving your neighbor seeks their good as defined by God, not by culture. And so that's another thing that we need to really keep in mind as we're seeking to love our neighbors is are we responding in an empathy that's not in truth. So toxic empathy is really that extorts the real and good desire to be kind and to be perceived as kind. Compassion must come from a place of both truth and love, and empathy can distort this. So I want to give you an example of what this can look like. A few months ago, I was approached by a close personal friend about her sister's 100-pound dog and helping with the needs of this dog. So, to summarize a conversation that took well over an hour, the sister was battling some mental illness concerns, had 3 children in her care. She was being kicked out of her apartment because of an inability to cover her rent. She could not find another apartment because she had this 100-pound dog who was unneutered and was covered in fleas. She then went on to tell me the kids were now getting flea bites and the dog was starting to get aggressive. So my friend asked if I could help with flea medication. So what in a case like this, what does empathy lead you to do? We don't want to seem uncaring or unempathetic. But then on the other hand, what does compassion lead you to do? And who's the compassion for? What does compassion for the woman, for the kids, and even compassion for the dog? What actions does that lead you to take? And honestly, they're not always the same. They're not going to lead to the same things. Your empathy may lead you to a different action than your compassion. Not moving. Okay. So you may ask at this point, like empathy, compassion, love, kindness, is this all just semantics? I want to be a good person. I want to help others. So does this really matter what we call it? And to answer that, I want to first look at what empathy is and what it's thought to be. So there is now commonly supposed to be 3 types of empathy. Emotional empathy, which is that feeling of others' feelings. Cognitive empathy, which is the understanding of what and why people feel the way they do, that more perspective taking of why somebody else is feeling the way they do. And then there's compassionate empathy. And truthfully, that idea of compassionate empathy, y'all, it is really just compassion. This is biblical compassion. And we're twisting and turning some words and coming up with other ideas. But what we're dealing with when you get down to compassionate empathy is biblical compassion. So we're talking about compassion overall and looking at Colossians as the verse for this year for CVM, and we're told to clothe ourselves in compassion. And we see these other things we're supposed to clothe ourselves with as well, right? Kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. You do not see empathy on this clothesline, and there is a reason for it. And we're going to get into this a little bit further, but we're clearly called to be compassionate. So, if our goal, our ultimate goal is compassion, how do we achieve this? So, being a good moral agent, loving our neighbor as God has called us, does require an understanding of how people work. We have to know what makes them happy. We have to know what causes them grief and why they get anxious. So, to make a positive difference, which is what I really believe most of us are striving for in and out of our clinics, you must have some grasp of what is going on in others' lives and minds. So if your operating definition of empathy is the capacity to understand what makes people tick, what gives them joy and brings them pain, I say, yes, we do need more of this. But to move out of that morally neutral territory of empathy and create a positive difference, we have to move past this cognitive empathy, this perspective taking, and ultimately lead to action and lead to compassion. So back to semantics. Does the phrasing really matter as long as we are loving, caring, and kind? And to that, I emphatically say yes. Yes, it does matter. And it matters to us as Christians because Satan is deceptive. He wants to lead believers astray. And to do this, he uses deceptive words. Words have meaning, and the culture around us. And I love how Dr. Graham talked about culture because I think it plays right into this. Because the culture around us wants to replace and override ideas specifically given to us by God. So I think it's important for us to realize what the meanings of these words are and what they're calling us to do. Because it is not an accident that the biblical idea of compassion is being replaced by empathy, and that we are being asked to lean into the other people's feelings and other people's truths. And that changes the idea of compassion into empathy, and it changes what we're being called to do. So it twists that idea that of what is intended as loving and kindness. So in 1 John 4:1, it says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world." We are seeing this happen, seeing false teachings more and more in the wellness arena. And we're talking more and more in the veterinary world about well-being. And this is where we're seeing a lot of this show up, these false teachings and these false ideas about where wellness comes from. And so the words and the ideas are being twisted. So they're no longer based in truth. And sometimes they're no longer based in love. And it becomes a dangerous situation when you're seeking wellness, but you're not seeking it in truth. So why does all of this matter? Well, it matters really in all areas of our lives. It matters in all areas because there is empathetic and emotional manipulation everywhere. We're seeing it in politics. I mean, we can probably all attest to that through this last year that we're seeing some emotional manipulation in that area. We're seeing it in advertising, religion, and even in our daily relationships. And one psychologist that I know personally and discussed this quite a bit with. She worked in the prison system and she worked for the VA for some time. She told me that some of the most highly empathetic people that she has met in her career were con artists, charming thieves, dogma bound mental health providers, fear mongering politicians, masterful liars, and merciless predators. And so that's a pretty scary thought to think that these are some of the most empathetic people that she encountered. But it shows us clearly being highly empathetic does not always lead to good. So, why do we need to lean away from empathy and into compassion? And why does empathy not deliver as promised? So, number one, empathy can be incapacitating. If you absorb the collective emotions of your clients, your colleagues, and your staff, along with even the pain of your patients, it can not only be difficult to be effective at your job, it can be difficult to get out of bed. So it just overwhelms. It becomes difficult, if not impossible, to help someone else if you are in the same emotional state that they are. So this picture right here, about a year ago, I am happily driving down the road and I come upon this scene. Well, this is my son's car. And I know at this time after school, he would have had one of my other sons with him in the car. So I see one child when I pull up, but I don't see the other. And I'm panicked, but motivated and want to find him. So I get out of my car, I locate him in the ditch with his head with his head cradled in his hands. But I'm not sure what exactly the state of, I know he's breathing and he's responsive, but he's clearly extremely painful. So blessedly, another driver had gotten there right before I had, and they had already called 911. And so the ambulance was there within moments. The ambulance team was efficient. They were thorough. They were systematic. They were even kind. But the last thing I needed or my kids needed was for those first responders to be empathetic towards us, taking on our fears and our anxiety and our sadness, because that would have hindered them from doing the job that they needed to do. In a more veterinary specific example, in our clinic, when we have families that are opting for euthanasia and have small children, we often encourage those clients to involve the entire family, including the kids. Understanding that this is often their first experience with loss, we want to allow them that time for the kids to talk about their pets and to feel some of those big feelings that they have. And this can apply to the adults as well, but often the children are the ones that need that chance to really explore those feelings, because and their parents don't always want to let them, because it's hard to watch our kids be injured or be even deal with just that hurt that comes with loss, right? But if we don't let those kids feel those feelings, then they're missing that chance to grief, to go through some level of grief and learn how to deal with that. But we as veterinarians can sometimes step into that place if the parents are able to offer that. But if we are overcome by that level of grief that those kids and even the adults are dealing with, then we are of little help to them. Because again, we can't help others when we're overwhelmed by their emotions. The second reason empathy really does not deliver is that empathy alone is unsustainable. Empathy can feel really good in the moment. We want to be giving, and it makes us feel as if we are easing the burden of the recipient of our empathy. But you run the risk of these momentary good feels turning into resentment. So when you say yes to a discount or you say yes to staying to treat an animal and it causes you to miss something in your life, miss a soccer game of one of your kids, or you don't get to make it to something that you were planning, these emotions build and add up and these feelings build, and it can turn into resentment towards your clinic, towards your clients, and sometimes even towards your patients. And so another reason, really, even more importantly, that empathy is not sustainable is that you can often do more harm to the recipients of your empathy if you are not coming from a place of love and truth. So think back to that flea infested 100-pound unneutered dog that I mentioned previously. What is coming from a place of truth and love doing for that pet and for that family? And is there that potential of inducing harm in that situation? I know many of you are familiar with the book When Helping Hurts. That idea is discussed throughout that text, and it is an excellent book. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend that you do. But it really gets into that idea of when our best intentions actually end up hurting others. Because our natural tendency, really, as decent human beings, is to move away from the discomfort in general. And so we want to give money to the person on the corner, even if they may be dealing with an addiction, and that's where that money is going. And we want to give money to buy medicine in a third world country, but we need to know the full context of what that's going to look like so we can react out of compassion and not just empathy. We want to be seen as good, and we want our discomfort to go away. And this is especially true if we have healthy kids and we have a little bit of money in the bank and we want to share things, but sometimes that reaction, that empathetic reaction, is not always what's best for the recipient. Compassion, on the other hand, though, is much more effective because both the giving and receiving, when we're dealing with compassion, leans into truth. And this leads into psychological well being for both the giver and the recipient. So we really do need to learn how to tolerate discomfort, and we need to learn how to sit with others' emotions and learn how to sit with those emotions without absorbing them. When we learn to do that, we strengthen our ability to be compassionate, and we avoid that downward spiral into empathy fatigue. And I really do believe that most cases of compassion fatigue should actually be called empathy fatigue. Third, empathy often asks us to ignore our own boundaries. Empathetic responses occur quickly and often reflexively. So these pictures are pictures of my kids, some of my kids doing various sports. And so think about sitting at a soccer game watching your kids or watching them in a sport. Like, so sitting in that soccer game, how many times do you move your legs and try to kick the ball for them, right? You're feeling what they're feeling and you want to create this action for them. You want to help them out, right? For me, the worst is watching my son wrestle because he is incredibly passionate about wrestling and really gets into, like, he wants to win these matches. So when he is on the mat, I am emotionally connected to what he's doing. And so I go home with sore shoulders and a sore back because I get into his matches and I feel what he's feeling. And this is really common and really, healthy for the most part for us as parents to have that sort of emotional connection, or even with a close friend or a sibling, you're going to have these more intense emotional connections. But even these connections can create problems if there aren't some sort of boundaries in place. But as we move further and further out in our circle of influence, we need to safeguard this reflexive emotional connection. So those of us with people-pleasing tendencies can fall into this kind of fuzzy boundary trap a little bit more easily. We don't want to seem uncaring, and we naturally tend to prioritize others' needs over our own. So that emotional openness to too wide a circle makes it difficult for us to enforce personal limits. And when we lose boundaries, we then open ourselves up to toxic empathy and emotional manipulation. And that, again, can lead to that extortion of that good desire that we have to be kind and even to be perceived as kind. We also have some veterinary specific risks when it comes to empathy. So if you look at the picture that I have here, this is the big 5 personality traits. These are psychological models that are used to describe 5 broad dimensions of personality. And so just take note of the red circle, and that's neuroticism. Neuroticism, veterinarians as a profession score significantly higher in neuroticism than most other professions. So this is the personality trait that is associated with emotional sensitivity, anxiety, and a tendency towards negative emotions. So as a profession, we are already primed to take on others' negative emotions. And so that leaves us more susceptible to having our own natural empathy manipulated. We as veterinarians really want to feel like we have made a difference in people and animals' lives. So in this quest to be a good veterinarian, we can have difficulty separating our responsibility as veterinary professionals from the responsibilities of the pet owner. We cannot take on the owner's personal responsibility for their animal. While we will have feelings about what our clients are going through and the decisions they're making, it is really important that we remember that the choices that they make are not ours. An additional consideration as to why veterinarians need to lean into compassion and away from empathy is that we are exposed to a unique and specific brand of empathy fatigue that few others understand because it's unique to dealing with animals and their people. We see both animal and human suffering on a daily basis. And so while dealing with animals and their humans, we're tasked with treating the pet and dealing with the emotions of their owner all at the same time. Not to mention also trying to get paid in the process. So this creates this kind of dynamic that is really specific to veterinary medicine and why we are at more risk for having that kind of empathy and our emotions manipulated. Also, in our current culture, more and more people are replacing human relationships with animal relationships. And so this has changed the expectations within the clinic dramatically. But the fact remains that we are still a profession that relies on clients' disposable income to succeed. And so this really puts veterinarians right in the crosshairs of owners in owners' negative emotions because we are directly in those crosshairs because they see us as the person in the way of of their pet getting better, especially when it comes down to things like finances. So let's talk specifically about what emotional manipulation or toxic empathy looks like. So I'm going to say odds are you're a pretty good person who does not like to feel negative emotions, right? So even us neurotic veterinarians have a tipping point for negative emotions. So when you feel bad about something, you want to do something to fix it. So if someone can make you feel shame or guilt, or they can get you to take on their emotions of anxiety and sadness, then they can also get you to take on some of their responsibility. So one way this is done is through emotional dumping. And so the emotional manipulator, or what I like to call empathy vampire, is not necessarily a bad person, but has a history, kind of comes into the situation with their own emotional baggage. They often have some level of trauma in their past. And this has resulted in them not being able to manage their emotions in a healthy way. So instead, what happens is they start to transfer their emotions over to you. They engage in behaviors and use words that make you feel bad. So an owner realizes they can't pursue treatment for their pet, and they start to make you feel bad now that they cannot treat their pet. So they get more and more emotional, and they have learned behaviors and words that transfer those emotions to you. So this emotional dumping is how they manage it. And you start to see you see this often in words like, if you really care, or so you're just going to let my dog die. These are some red flags that someone is dumping their emotions on you, and they are in the process dumping some of their responsibility on you as well. Another version of this is manipulative victimhood. If they can claim victimhood, they can transfer those negative feelings to anyone they see as not saving them from their current crisis. This is when clients, colleagues, or even organizations think rescues. They use exaggerated victim narratives, right? So they to get what they want. They they flip things around and try to put the fault on you. They want to make things your fault. So this is when we see clients claim emotional distress. This dog is the only thing, or this cat is the only thing I have. Or they weaponize their pet's suffering. What kind of vet won't help a sick animal, right? So we've heard these things before. So they're dumping things on you, they're making them your fault, and then they're manipulating your feelings of duty and conscientiousness. So remember back to that the big five personality traits. Another one of those is conscientiousness. That is another trait that veterinarians rank very high on as a profession. So we take our responsibilities and our duties very seriously. So our high conscientiousness also puts us at risk for that manipulating of our responsibilities, or them manipulating what should be their responsibilities into becoming our responsibility. So again, these are more red flags when you start to hear these things that that victim narrative come into play. And also, if while advocating for yourself, your team, or your clinic, or even your patient, if you're being made to feel bad in the process, take note, pay attention, because likely your emotions in that moment are being hijacked. So, how do we embrace compassion and deal with the toxic empathy or emotional manipulation that we're seeing? Oh, sorry, I got stuck right here. All right. So, the number one way to lean into compassion, it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay. The number one way to lean into compassion is to deepen our relationship with our compassionate God, right? A strong relationship with God is the best guide for treating others with compassion. The deep hurt and discomfort that we feel with empathy fatigue is a reminder to us. It reminds us to purposefully pursue God's compassionate presence. This is a time when we want to pursue and we want to do this on a daily basis, but I think so for some of us it takes those feelings of empathy fatigue to really remind us that the importance of prayer, meditation, solitude, retreat, worship, fellowship, all of those things that we have in our toolbox to connect us back and connect us to a compassionate God, because we need to pursue his presence. Regardless of whatever the practice is, we can always return to that root of infinite compassion. And that helps us to feel replenished and loved. And it is really from this place that we're able to share true compassion with our circle of influence. Also, we need to embrace self-compassion. Do not gloss over this one. Really, in Christian circles, self-compassion has been underemphasized. We laud the Christian mandate to love our neighbor, but it is important to realize that Jesus invites us to love our neighbor as ourselves and not instead of ourselves. A genuine compassion for others begins with compassion for self, rooted in God's loving compassion for his children. So, self compassion allows you to fully embrace that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and it allows you to carry that compassion outward. So, it is very important that we prioritize our own well being. We hear this and we blow this off, but I am going to implore you to really think about this and find ways to lean into self-compassion, because empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue is real, and we need to stop brushing it under the rug. We're getting better as a profession, but we still really need to address those things. And I am looking forward to hearing what Dr. Lee has to share on this coming up. Next, check your own emotional response in the moment. So if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, ask yourself if your feelings are changing suddenly, or there's a big emotional response, especially when you're dealing with someone else who you know is emotional about a situation. Ask yourself, why are you feeling what you're feeling, and are those feelings really yours? And that's the time when you need to really acknowledge distress and someone else's distress without absorbing it. This is an area where you can start to use phrases like, I see how hard this is for you, instead of I feel so bad for you. And it seems like a small thing, but when you're acknowledging someone's distress, even using language that acknowledges it but doesn't feel it for them, doesn't take on their feelings, it's going to make a difference for how you are interacting with people that are really emotional. So if you're feeling a distinct shift in your mood or your emotions, if possible, remove yourself from that situation and just take a second to refocus with a quick prayer or a breathing exercise, and then re-engage from a spot of acknowledging that possibly those emotions were not all yours. And then don't negotiate with guilt. If a client is pressuring you with emotional tactics and they're starting to dump their emotions on you, step back, reaffirm what is possible, think about what's happening in this moment, and allow yourself to just know what the situation is instead of quickly trying to respond. You have time to take time. You need to take time to really think about what your reaction is going to be and making your choices. And this is also when you need to own your choice and communicate it non-defensively, because a non-defensive communication is going to diffuse that situation. Whereas if you feel like you have to defend your clinic or doing what's best, because if really you do not have to defend doing what is best for yourself or your clinic at any point. So communicating non-defensively is going to be a better route to take than trying to tell them all the reasons why you can't treat their pet or you can't give them something for free. I've got two more here, so you want to respond with compassion. Responding with compassion, which is what this is all about, right? Means including the other person in the process. So most contentious and high emotion interactions are caused by fear and anxiety. But if you can make a client or often a staff member, I feel like this happens a lot with staff, like making sure they're included in some ideas and decisions within the clinic, that if you can make them feel heard and included, and give them a sense of control in the situation, it makes it so much harder for them to be able to manipulate your feelings and your emotions. And there are fewer negative emotions in a situation like that for them to feel they need to unload on you. And lastly, embrace saying no. We've all probably heard before, no is a complete sentence, but it is true. And to say no in whatever form it takes in the moment, it may not be where you're directly saying no, but you need to convey something to a client or a staff member that whatever form that takes in the moment, that is often the most compassionate thing you can do, even when it's uncomfortable. So don't fear embracing a no. Since we have a little time, I do want to share this video with you on compassion. This is from the Bible Project. And I think ultimately I wanted it to bookend the other video, but I think this one will play well. And so I'm going to play it, but it shows us why compassion holds so much more power for love, healing, and better understanding than empathy.
Karren, you may not have clicked the box to optimize audio when you shared your screen. Do you want to
Oh,
stop sharing and reshare and then make sure to check that box? Because I'm
oh,
not sure if we're supposed to hear anything, but we don't really hear it.
oh, you don't hear it. Okay.
Is anybody hearing it? We're not really hearing the video.
Oh, well, and it's a good one. So I would like to, so
Yeah. So stop
stop.
share, and then
All
when you
right, let me try that again.
reshare, there'll be a little tiny box. They almost hide it from you to optimize audio and video.
Oh, I see it here. Okay.
There you go. Check those and it should work better.
Let me see
They're
if that'll.
tricky.
Thank you. Is that working?
Not yet. It's taking its time again. But we're patient.
It's not working yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
There it
Both
is.
of these words are related to the Hebrew word for womb, rechem. So compassion in the Hebrew Bible is centered in a person's core, and the word invites us to imagine a mother's tender feelings for her vulnerable infant. So rahum is a word that conveys intense emotion. Sometimes it's even translated as deeply moved, like in the story of King Solomon, who meets two women who've just given birth. One of their babies sadly dies, but then both women claim that the baby still living is theirs. As a test, Solomon says to cut the baby in two and give each mother a half. And the baby's real mother is deeply moved. She would rather the other woman take her baby than see her child die. And it's her compassion that reveals that she's the true mother. But rahum isn't just an emotional word. It also involves action. And surprisingly, the word is used most often to describe God's actions, motivated by his emotions. Like when the Israelites are suffering and oppressed in Egypt, God hears their cries and is compelled by his compassion, his rachamim, to rescue them. Then, as the Israelites travel through the dangerous wilderness, they're hungry and thirsty, and God is Rahum, caring for them as his own child. He provides everything they need, food, water, and clothing, as he personally guides them. So it's no surprise that when Yahweh reveals his character to the Israelites in the wilderness, he begins by saying he's compassionate. But despite Yahweh's continual rachamim, the Israelites turn away from him time and again. They reject Yahweh's compassion and instead give their allegiance to other gods. And rather than showing compassion to each other, they do violence. And their rebellion results in exile, and they're scattered among the nations. And it's in this dark moment in Israel's story that we come to the book of Isaiah, where Yahweh compares himself to a where Yahweh compares himself to a mother full of rachamim toward her baby. He says, can a mother forget her nursing child, or have no compassion or rachamim on the child of her womb? Even if she forgets, I will not forget you. God is full of motherly compassion, and he will rescue his people. And as you read further in Isaiah, you realize that God is going to do this by entering into the suffering of humanity. And this points forward to a time when Jesus comes on the scene. He, always deep compassion, become human. In Greek, the word compassion is oiktirmos. And as Jesus embraces the sick and cares for the outcast, he is deeply moved by human suffering. Jesus compares himself to a mother hen using her wings to shield her chicks from danger as he gathers people into his embrace. And in the ultimate expression of oiktirmos, Jesus is moved by compassion to enter into humanity's suffering, into death itself, to rescue and bring us near to God. And it's this same life of compassion that Jesus calls his followers to imitate, allowing ourselves to be moved by the pain of others, to embrace the hurting, and to participate in relieving suffering in the world. In this way, we too can embody the compassion of Yahweh, or in Jesus' words, be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Now you can see how fitting it is that compassionate is the first word God uses to describe himself. So when we're in pain or see others suffering, we can be certain that God is deeply moved to respond, and that he's there to meet us with his deep compassion.
All right. So I do think that really dealing with emotional manipulation and toxic empathy is taking a toll on our society as a whole, and specifically within veterinary medicine. So this is why trying to respond with empathy alone can be draining and overwhelming. It's harming us and negatively affecting our work. But if we can react with compassion and an understanding that many pet owners are scared, they're anxious, they come ill prepared to deal with their medical needs. And we have that, and we can come to that with an understanding, but also avoid allowing them to manipulate our emotions. And this, and to really dump those emotions on us as well. And so really everyone is better served if we can understand that difference between empathy and compassion. And in an era of empathy and emotional intelligence as these buzzwords being celebrated, it's the solution to every problem, I think it's a time to really revisit compassion and what it means to be compassionate, and that empathy needs to be balanced, that it is a tool, but it is a tool that needs to be used in the service of compassion.